15 years ago we walked here and weren't bit by them. Now we get bit almost every time.
They're modern vampires. 50 to 100 bites a year. That's a minimum.
The bacteria is spreading in the tick population. Their bite transmits the infection.
Would want to wake up and just be like, okay, yeah, I just slept the whole day and now it's nighttime and I still want to go back to sleep.
The headaches hurt so much. I think all my neighbors could hear me yelling.
After 16 years of doctors telling me that it was all in my head.
No, you're not ill. It's psychosomatic. Go see a shrink or a psychologist. You're crazy. That's what most patients are being told.
It's the #1 worldwide spreading vector-borne epidemic. The #1.
This story has a guilty party, and it's invisible, or almost. A tiny insect that carries a dangerous disease. The tick, an acari barely a quarter-inch in size, that transmits a terrible and largely unknown disease, Lyme borreliosis, or Lyme disease. The northeastern United States is one of the regions on the planet that's the hardest hit. In the state of New York, Dr. Ostfeld concentrates his research on the environmental causes for the current increase in the tick population. He doesn't have to search far to collect specimens.
A nymph right there. There's another nymph right here. These ticks are everywhere. They're out in the middle of the woods. They're right next to people's houses. They're right next to roads. That's one of the reasons why Lyme disease is the threat that it is. And so these nymphal ticks, this stage that we just pulled off the cloth, are responsible for the vast majority of Lyme disease cases and other tick-borne diseases as well.
Invulnerable and camouflaged, perched atop blades of grass, patiently lying in wait, the tick is a solitary hunter. It can wait for weeks before attaching itself to its prey. It's armed with dual appendages called chelicerae and a harpoon-like hippostome. The chelicerae pull themselves into the skin. Then the hippostome pushes itself between them, piercing a vein and allowing the tick to nourish itself with blood. This meal can last several days. As it becomes filled with blood, the tick can grow to the size of a peanut. But this minuscule vampire is only dangerous if it's infected with a bacteria. The combination of these villains, the tick and the bacteria, results in the propagation of Lyme disease.
The tick inoculates its host with Borrelia bacteria. The full name is Borrelia burgdorferi. The inoculation occurs in the skin. A circular rash may appear in 2/3 of the cases. It doesn't remain constant. Often, it isn't taken seriously by a doctor or a pharmacist or a family member. It's considered a simple insect bite and it goes untreated. If untreated, the disease evolves for several weeks in a subacute form. Then, within months or years, the disease becomes chronic. The disease will evolve in this manner for 10 or 20 years, or for a lifetime if the patient remains unaware and the Lyme disease goes untreated.
Several weeks of antibiotics started just after the tick bite is sufficient for eliminating the infection. But if the victim isn't treated in time, the disease becomes very complicated. This bacteria is a veritable time bomb. It can lie dormant in the body for years, suddenly awakening when the immune system becomes weakened. Judith Alberta doesn't remember being bitten by a tick. She's a pilot, and at the start of her career, she suffered from periods of severe fatigue. But this wasn't enough to worry a woman who flies at 20,000 feet. Then one day, the disease manifested itself.
It's much later, after starting at Air France and becoming a flight instructor, that I began having problems. I had joint pains in my back, at the top of the spine, in my cervical vertebrae. I had vision problems. I began having trouble speaking, which created a big problem in my work as an instructor. After a while, it got so bad that I had to stop my job and leave Air France. I could no longer work.
It took years before she was able to identify the source of her problem. She saw specialist after specialist, but Lyme disease was never evoked as a possibility.
37 medical visits in 10 months between June 2008 and April 2009, and no results. Ma'am, you have no illness. I was examined with MRIs, scanners, scintigraphies, cystoscopies, and biological tests with no diagnosis. We looked everywhere and found nothing. I was told, ma'am, you should see a shrink. It got worse and no health professional understood what I had. Terrible pain and no ideas. Burning in the muscles, in the stomach, the lungs, head and eye pains, permanent burning pains. There were winters when I thought, this is impossible. I can't go on like this. I can't imagine another year like this. It's impossible.
For the victims of Lyme disease, the incapacity to diagnose it is a terrible ordeal, and patients' physical suffering is augmented by the disease's lack of official recognition. This is Lyme disease's surprising paradox. Statistically quite frequent, to doctors, it's not well known and often badly diagnosed. This is partly due to the very low number of specialists. To meet with one of the world's top specialists on Lyme disease, we'll travel to New York State. Dr. Horowitz opened a specialized medical center where hundreds of new patients come each month.
When I came up to the Hudson Valley approximately 26 years ago, I was moving into a very highly Lyme endemic area. I didn't realize how bad the tick-borne infections were in this area. And when I moved to this area, I was seeing patients with Lyme disease, and many of them got better, but some of them didn't. And I decided that it would be good for me to investigate and find out why these people were getting sick. More of an inflammation in a diverticulum in the colon. Okay. What I may want to do is they drew the bloods for you. So what symptoms?
For the young Aliana, contracting Lyme disease was a terrible experience.
Usually when it's urinary.
Very thankful when I actually came here. Very, very thankful, because when I walked in, I looked horrible. Absolutely. I looked like I walked into a smoke-filled room. My eyes were all red. It would be 80 degrees outside. It would be the summertime, 80 degrees and everything, and I would have like 4 jackets on and sweatpants. I was freezing no matter where I was. It was definitely a rough road. I was very, very tired. Very, very tired. I would sleep all the time, and after I would get up, I would still be tired.
And then her cognitive issues got so bad that she had memory loss. She didn't know a bridge when we were going over it. She didn't know my mother. 1 week she didn't know who I was.
But before her disease was identified, some doctors proposed a curious diagnosis.
I went to a pediatrician at first, and she was very okay. She's feeling around my stomach, seeing what's going on, and in the end, she pretty much just said it was all in my head, and that I'm a kid, and I just want drama, and...
Unfortunately, stories like Aliana's of medical errors occur all around the planet, even in the United States, where the threat of Lyme disease is well identified. William lives in Maine, where he found no medical support for years.
Well, I don't treat for Lyme disease. And that was after 16 years of symptoms of pain and muscle pain, fatigue, bad sleep, all the usual symptoms. But after 16 years of doctors telling me that it was all in my head, it was all mental, and I kept on saying, it's not, it's physical pain, and I'm not bringing it on myself. I've been stable all my life, there's something wrong. And it took me 16 years to find a doctor that actually said, okay, let's do the proper blood tests and find out what's going on. And he said, oh, you've got Lyme.
Dr. Horowitz is one of the rare doctors able to diagnose Lyme disease in its various forms. He created a special method for doing this.
Lyme disease is a multi-systemic illness. So what I do is I usually get a history from a patient, and I give them a questionnaire. And this questionnaire has 38 points. And if I see that a patient fills out this questionnaire and they have many different symptoms, not just joint pain, not just fatigue, but they say that they have day sweats, night sweats, and chills, suggestive of babesia, a malarial infection. They have fatigue that comes and goes with good and bad days. They have joint pain and muscle pain that migrates around the body. One day it's in one place, 3 days later it's in another place in their body. They have tingling, numbness, and burning that comes and goes and migrates around the body. They have memory and concentration problems, and they're young, and they shouldn't have any. If they have those type of symptoms and they say, I'm sensitive to light, I have sound sensitivity, I can't fall asleep at night, or I keep waking up, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, and I have no reason. Those symptoms are the multisystemic symptoms of Lyme disease, and that would make one suspect.
It's thanks to this combination of complex treatments that patients feel an improvement. Yet even after 20 years of practice, the doctor and his assistants are still searching for new answers.
When you see somebody walk in originally who can barely walk, is non-communicative because they have partial paralysis in their face and they can't speak to you very well, and then 6 months later they're walking in and they're carrying in a full conversation, you understand them and you can enjoy this, which is nice, and then of course something triggers it, and then 6 months later they're coming back in and they can barely walk and they can barely talk again. That's the sad part.
In the United States, a great deal of attention is given to tick-borne diseases because they've been recognized as a health danger for a very long time. For centuries, native Indians avoided traveling through certain valleys during autumn and spring, the period when ticks are in abundance. They saw that those who were bitten could fall ill with an incurable disease. In 1972, in the little city of Lyme in Connecticut, an epidemic of a strange arthritic condition struck the youth and the young children. No one at the time thought of a bacterial disease. At the time, it was thought that antibiotics could kill off all infectious diseases. The mysterious disease gets the name Lyme disease. It wasn't until 1982 that the scientist Willy Bergdorfer established the link between ticks and the transmission of the Borrelia bacteria to humans. Borrelia is not an ordinary bacteria. It's intelligent. It can change its appearance. It can move rapidly, infiltrate all of the body's tissues and bones. This tiny spiral organism is a formidable enemy for researchers. At Connecticut's New Haven University, Professor Eva Sappi directs a research laboratory dedicated to studying the Borrelia bacteria and its mysteries.
It's interesting because Dr. Bergdorfer discovered Borrelia practically 30 years ago. And here we are, we're still having issues how to cure those Lyme disease patients, how to eliminate Borrelia. So whether we didn't ask the right question in the last 30 years, or just the Borrelia is way too smart, and we really have to fully understand to completely eradicate this organism. So Borrelia can take multiple forms. The three well-known forms are spirochete, the cyst or round body form, and the biofilm form. Biofilm, for example, is a very special form. Think about a shelter, or even a city. So when it is attacked by immune system or some antimicrobials, it can hide from it.
It's a very virulent bacteria. And the problem is, it knows how to change form, how to hide in the body. It goes inside the cells where it hides. It creates blebs, pieces of DNA, like decoys, which go out, and your immune system goes after the DNA, but the bug is hiding inside your cells, and your cells become a target for the immune system with an autoimmune type reaction. And it even exists in places where antibiotics do not penetrate well. If it goes deep in the joints, deep into the eye, deep into the glial tissues of the brain, antibiotics do not penetrate well in these areas to kill it off. So the bacteria is extremely clever. It has more DNA than any other bacteria on the face of the planet.
a bacteria that's so intelligent that with the complicity of the host tick, it propagates unhindered. In the U.S., 2013's official health statistics recorded 10 times more cases of Lyme disease than the previous year. That translates into 300,000 new cases per year.
This is a spreading epidemic. I've visited Europe. I've been to France. I've been to Germany. I've been to England. I was in Belgium. We are seeing a worldwide epidemic, including 2-3 years ago. I was invited by the Chinese government to come to China. They were having a problem with Lyme disease there. So this is a worldwide problem that we really need to pay attention to.
The epidemic developed out of two principal territories, the United States and a second zone in Eastern Europe stretching to Asia. Today, new propagation zones and new strains of this bacteria are being discovered. In Africa, some French researchers who came here to study malaria have shed new light on the importance of Lyme disease, or Lyme borreliosis. They found it in about 10 countries in northern and western Africa. Here we're in Senegal, south of Dakar, in the village of Dielmo.
For over 20 years, we've been studying malaria in the region. But in addition, we've been studying all the other pathologies present. The number 2 disease just behind malaria is borreliosis. Some years, we've seen up to 1/4 of the village's population infected with Lyme disease. And it's almost always mistaken with malaria. Sometimes it's mistaken with a type of malaria that's resistant to medication. Yet the illness is actually something quite different. It's Lyme borreliosis, a bacterial disease that has spread widely throughout Africa.
Thanks to Dr. Trapp's team, the entire village has a new awareness of the dangers of this disease. The chief is explaining what he thinks of Lyme disease. For him, Lyme borreliosis is similar to malaria, but he feels it's even more dangerous. Because with Lyme, you get a strong fever, and you feel like your bones are going to break on the inside. Reinforced surveillance combined with good prevention techniques help to control the effects of the infection once it appears.
Every day we visit different villages to see who has fallen ill. We take the children's temperature, and each time that we find the symptoms, we ask that they fill out a questionnaire, and we also take a biological test.
To better understand Lyme disease's proliferation, the doctor has his special method. He places traps, not for catching ticks, but for catching rodents. Because though the tick is the arm that commits the crime, the true guilty one is the rodent. These mammals are the initial reservoirs for the Borrelia bacteria, and though rodents don't develop the disease, they transmit it. One of these mammals can carry 100 ticks and contaminate them with the Borrelia bacteria. Later, when the tick nourishes itself with the blood from a vertebrate, such as a human, it transmits the infection.
Last night, we captured 11 specimens of 4 different species. One is a gerbiliscus, and we have 2 species of mastomys. We will test their blood and then make some other more detailed tests to analyze in the laboratory and see if they're carrying Borrelia bacteria.
And these rodents carrying their cargo of ticks can often infiltrate into homes. The little girl just examined by Dr. Trapp was certainly infected in her bedroom.
C'est la grande, hein? C'est la grande. Donc c'est toi donc voilà ça va non ça va oh là là elle pleure elle est intimidée a priori tout est rentré dans l'ordre.
It seems the treatment is working.
Elle a eu 10 jours de traitement.
She's had 10 days of antibiotics.
Normalement
Now, normally, she should be cured.
voilà normalement elle est guérie là maintenant. On va voir s'il y a des terriers.
We're going to try to find rodent nests in the home and in the bedrooms, because the rodent population is very high in the fields and in the forest. But they are also very present in homes where they find plenty to eat.
De nourriture. C'est le lit. Ah oui, là il y a un terrier.
Here we have an active nest. It's probably the home of some mastomys. They've dug through the cement floor. There are certainly ticks inside. The person sleeping in this bed was bitten last week and contracted borreliosis. Here's the obvious explanation why. The mastomys nest is next to the bed, so the ticks certainly got into the bed, attracted by the sleeping person, and they transmitted Lyme disease to the person. About 30 to 40% of ticks in this region are infected with borreliosis. There, we can clean it out now.
The rodent was captured with its passengers, but many ticks still remain in the burrow. The vacuum cleaner will be used to clean them out.
Deux, trois, 4, 5, oui, là, ici, voilà. Voilà, il y en a qui sont bien gorgés.
Some of them are full of blood.
The time has come for harvesting the ticks. They'll get the same treatment as the rodents. After being collected, Dr. Trapp will test their level of contamination. Around the world, the growing danger from the spread of Lyme disease is far from understood. The dangerous triangle, bacteria, rodent, tick, is progressing on a very open road. One reason for this is that the forests have become more and more split up, eliminating many of the contaminated rodents' natural predators. High numbers of rodents means more ticks and a higher risk of the spread of Lyme disease.
Shake the mouse into a bag so that I count the ticks, collect data before letting it go. Doesn't like having its ears moved. She does have some ticks, 3 larval ticks. This mouse will transmit Lyme disease to about 90% of the ticks that feed on it. Many people ask, well, if the mice are so bad, if they're giving us so many diseases, why don't we just get rid of them? And the answer is that it's just impossible to get rid of them. They are such a resilient animal. B4316. So when we protect diversity, we have things like foxes, owls, even raccoons and skunks will prey on mice. And when that happens, we can actually see a reduced mouse population, which is also protective of human health. We're doing 2 things at the same time. On the one hand, we're making risk worse by chopping up the forest into little bits. And then if we place our homes right next to those little bits of forest, that's the worst case scenario for high Lyme disease. And that's indeed what we have happening.
And Europe is not free of risk. Few European countries are fully conscious of the danger of Lyme disease. But in Germany, the menace is being taken very seriously. Here, information on the fight against ticks is displayed in every pharmacy.
Yes, we know there's a problem when you get bitten by a tick. We know it must be removed as soon as it's discovered. It's already a sort of epidemic. We're seeing people getting ill. This region is near the Rhine River, the Black Forest, the Vosges, and the tick population is high here, and they're transmitting the disease, especially borreliosis or Lyme disease. No country in the world counts the number of people infected with borreliosis. But in Germany, we see statistics that indicate we have an epidemic. Each year, the number of infected people increases by 10 to 15%. Estimations are that 1 to 2 million people in Germany are infected. For 80 million inhabitants, that's 1 in 80.
In neighboring France, there's no official discussion of the epidemic. On the contrary, Lyme disease is officially categorized as a rare disease. But the number of infected victims is higher than believed. For this family doctor in Alsace, this affair could be called a case of medical denial. It's not a rare disease. In a family practice like mine, we see hundreds of cases. Those types of numbers mean it's not a rare disease. And if you look at the statistics in Germany, you have to wonder why there's such a difference with France. A few kilometers away, they report 200 times more cases than here in France. Is the Rhine River stopping Lyme disease like they said it stopped Chernobyl's contamination? Why would France not measure the full impact of the spread of Lyme disease? It may be hard to believe, but Professor Perron thinks that the state-approved system for detecting Lyme disease produces lower numbers than the true count of infected people.
The problem today in testing for Lyme disease is that 30 years ago, it was officially classified as a rare disease. So now, the testing protocol is such that we can never conduct tests on over 5% of people who come up positive in a given population. They have created a ceiling for testing. In my own experience with some patients, I have seen that the same individual who gets tested in different regions on the same day or same week can get different results.
In other words, a patient considered non-infected in one region would get a positive result in another region because the test sensitivity varies from one region to another. In addition, there are the scientific uncertainties. Today, some are calling into question the accuracy of the test.
The ELISA test is not very sensitive. It's published in the medical literature. It has a sensitivity of about 55-56%. This is Johns Hopkins University, who says sensibility 55%. It's a coin flip.
In some places in the United States, patients are being informed of the test's lack of accuracy. Despite the fact that the tests lack reliability, they are nonetheless the required protocol in most industrialized countries, based on the norm established in the United States in 2006.
Today, we're using a test that isn't satisfactory. What we're asking for is a qualified authority, which is objective and that creates a valid treatment protocol. What we have today is a political situation. We're obliged to remain in our laboratory, at our local level, and we do what we feel is the best practice. But we don't have scientific agreement. We don't have a scientific consensus, nor an agreed-upon practice that can put our minds to rest. We need a very clear scientific consensus, not a consensus of denial.
Is it a deliberate strategy, a lack of political engagement, or simply a laxist attitude? What is certain is that health officials are maintaining an unclear system. And the scientific debate doesn't end there. Health officials are not even in agreement on the form of Lyme disease. Can it become chronic? Does it evolve? Should treatment be punctual or long-term? Officially, France's National Reference Center recommends 3 weeks of antibiotics with the possibility of 1 3-week extension. For those following the official state doctrine, no chronic form of Lyme disease exists. Today, it's not possible for Lyme disease to be considered as a chronic illness. It can result in some physical after effects, probably in the joints. That's possible. But it isn't a chronic disease. After a certain period of time, the microbe is dead and the disease is done. Yet the microbe can cause some lasting effects. That's my way of seeing things. According to our expert in New York, the opposite is true. He believes that punctual treatment doesn't always deliver results. The fight against bacteria can be long-term.
There are many diseases in medicine. Leprosy with tuberculosis, you treat for years. So it's not unheard of in medicine to use antibiotics long-term. When I treat, I usually don't use one antibiotic. Just like with tuberculosis, I combine antibiotics. If you understand the biology of the organism, you have to combine the treatments, and that is how I have some of my success.
If the disease is so resistant, it's possibly because Borrelia bacteria has many allies. Often, the tick transmits an entire battalion of infectious agents. And some experts think the persistent symptoms are the result of this cocktail of pathogens.
Ticks are like little crawling syringes, capable of inoculating a person with a large variety of microbes. I read an article that said ticks are a menagerie of microbes because they carry so many microbes, parasites, and viruses. They are not all dangerous to humans nor to animals, but some of them are a threat to us.
First of all, our co-infection rate were extremely high. It's so high that we had hard time publish the data. We also find novel organisms such as mycoplasma and filarial nematodes, but again, because it's such a novel idea, we're still having very hard time to publish it and convince people that it's real.
The ticks are containing multiple infections. With one bite, you can get Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, Babesia, tick-borne encephalitis viruses, Bartonella. You can get all these different organisms, and it overwhelms the immune system. So your immune system can't keep up with all of these organisms at once, and it becomes overstimulated. And what happens with an overstimulated immune system is you get autoimmunity. So your immunity, in some cases, goes down, but in some cases it gets overstimulated. Actually, it can happen at the same time. All of these inflammatory cytokines, these molecules that cause inflammation, it causes the joint pain and the swelling and the memory problems and the pain and the fatigue. Once you hit the infections and you lower the inflammation and you balance the immune system, people get better. So I call this the 3 I's for chronic disease. You must treat infection, inflammation, and immune dysfunction.
After years of suffering from a disease with no name, Judith finally received the benefits of a prescription that was both complex and exceptional.
I began flying again in January 2011, after 3/4 of my treatment period, which was initially an alternative treatment, followed by an allopathic treatment with very strong doses of antibiotics. They helped me get back on my feet, get my spirit back, and my energy increased. I was in good health again. I could pilot again.
Though Judith now feels better, the disease still weighs heavily on Joanna. Her life these past 7 years has been punctuated by regular visits to Professor Perron, head of the infectious disease unit at Garches Hospital on the outskirts of Paris.
I'm not having heart problems.
And no chest pains?
No. No.
Joanna's case is typical. She was an active woman in great physical shape. She likes sports, has lots of projects, her family and children, work, etc. And after a walk in the forest, her life becomes completely different and difficult. It's true that at first it's very hard. A tick bite doesn't look dangerous. And I looked again at her medical file, with the photo of the rash mark on her thigh. At the time, her doctor said it was nothing to worry about. Then, soon after, she became very tired. She had bad headaches, pains in her joints, and she had difficulty walking. About 2 months later, she came in and saw one of our assistants because she had no idea what could be affecting her in this way.
Joanna is a primary school teacher. Her passion is teaching children to read and write. But Lyme disease has changed her life, making even simple things a constant effort. She's lost much of her short-term memory. To adapt, she's created rituals.
I have to put my medicine out in front of me on the table every day. I have to place things in front of me. I have to use Post-its to remind myself of things to do. But it's complicated because I can forget that I wrote something on a Post-it, and I don't have a good attention span. I have big problems with concentration.
Over time, Joanna's health has improved, thanks once again to a long-term treatment.
After 7 months of treatment, I felt better for about 5 minutes. It didn't last. It went back to being bad. But I had the 5 minutes. 10 minutes the next day, then 10 hours the next day. After that, things began getting better.
Science's combat against Lyme disease has only just begun. The world over, researchers are working on new paths for research: diagnosis, tests, vaccines, stem cells, genetics, treatments with plants. The medical offensive against this protean disease has branched out. But in France, research is still in its infancy.
It's hard for Lyme disease research to advance when there's so little money invested in it. For the moment, the pharmaceutical industry is showing little interest in Lyme research because we're treating it with old forms of antibiotics like penicillin and tetracycline, which are very cheap and can be sold in generic form. From the industry's point of view, Lyme is a rare disease, surrounded by a complicated polemic. They don't see a high return on their eventual investment. We're turning in circles. We're told we need to progress scientifically, but we don't have the budget. The priority is to find sufficient financing for research.
And as research continues looking for a miracle cure, Judith is carrying on her own personal fight. She wrote a book about her personal struggle with Lyme disease. And 2 years ago, with doctors and other victims, she founded Lyme Without Borders, an association whose goal is to defend all those who are being ignored by health professionals and push authorities to finally acknowledge the scale of the epidemic. And her efforts have definitely garnered results.
In 18 months, I have answered 18,000 emails and 18,000 phone calls. People tell me of their terrible state of distress. We are able to direct people to qualified doctors who are trained in the latest methods for fighting Lyme disease. We can listen to their stories and put them in contact with other members in our association. If they need it, we can recommend legal professionals to help them with legal actions. For example, when their illness is being denied by professionals, or if they lose their job because of Lyme disease.
Once a year in Strasbourg, Judith organizes a colloquium that allows patients and doctors to keep up to date on progress in research. Patient groups like this one are fighting to get French authorities to authorize long-term and alternative treatments for chronic cases.
I had 3 weeks of antibiotics in the hospital. I got out, and I continued them at home. I asked what sort of follow-up treatment I would get. I was told there was none. That surprised me. But after 2 years of struggling with this, nothing surprises me anymore. This situation is very disturbing. It means that if at the end of the treatment you're still suffering from Lyme disease, you're basically abandoned. Unfortunately, I feel the situation is so complicated that one must consider looking elsewhere, even going abroad, to get treated correctly.
To hear the opinions of top experts, the association calls upon doctors from the world over. Dr. Horowitz from New York has come to speak. He's here to say loud and clear that Lyme disease, with its many symptoms, demands a new and revolutionary treatment protocol. Patients come to me saying that they've seen 20 doctors and yet they still don't know what to do. It's as if a person told a doctor, "I have a pain in my foot. I have 16 nails in my foot," and the doctor takes out 2 nails. The patient comes back again and says, "I still have pain and 14 nails in my foot." The doctor responds, "But I took out 2. The patient says, "Yes, but I still have 14 nails."
The participants brought a positive message. They said it's possible to live very well with Lyme disease, even if one can't be cured of it. They spoke in a very probing and factual way about elements that are divergent from France's consensual vision of the illness. They brought practical information that we'll be able to put to use. So the conference has helped to filter the mass of relevant information, so people no longer feel lost and unable to act in the face of all this information.
The association also helps patients fight for recognition through legal channels. Lyme disease often keeps victims from being able to hold a steady job. So much needs to be done to keep victims' physical suffering from being compounded by financial difficulties.
I was getting workers' compensation for 3 years. Then I had to see an insurance doctor. He told me that I was 100% capable of working. He didn't want to take my symptoms into account, despite the results I had from the German tests I'd taken. I showed a statement from a French neurologist that said, "I have a physical handicap. I have chronic fatigue." That medical visit lasted only 5 minutes, and there was nothing polite about it. I was told, "Sir, you're going to have to go back to work." Since that day, my workers' compensation has been stopped, and I have no revenue to live on.
Those who are ill often find themselves abandoned by their doctors and by the National Health Insurance, which demands that a doctor provide a date when the patient can start their job again. But this is not always possible in reality, as the disease is chronic and Lyme disease makes the victim an invalid to a certain degree. We're struggling to gain recognition of the degree of invalidity and also recognition that the patient can't begin their job again. This recognition would allow the victim to get their workers' compensation. Then they can continue to seek the best treatment. Because unfortunately, gaining access to the right treatment is not easy for everyone, and it's not free.
If on the one hand the ill are often abandoned, on the other hand doctors and biologists who come to their aid and who stray from official practices are victims of a worldwide witch hunt.
There are doctors who are treating patients with protocols outside the officially approved methods. These new methods have been officially approved in the United States and Germany by experts who are just as competent and scientific as those who wrote the guidelines. The doctors here who practice these new methods are often pursued by the National Medical Council, which tries to keep doctors from treating Lyme disease in new ways they feel are best.
Judith has made her life's combat the defense and aid of Lyme's victims. But she isn't the only one to be marching in the street. In France, in Europe, and around the globe, protests are being organized. In 2013, the very first Lyme Disease Awareness Day saw tens of thousands of protesters gather from Vancouver to Warsaw, from Melbourne to Stockholm. If the illness is protean, then the combat must be the same. Together with other victims, Geneviève Perello founded the Borreliosis Network. Her objective is to clarify the massive information being published on Lyme disease, much of which is contradictory. Geneviève suffers from a neurological form of the disease, neuroborreliosis. Paralysis, speech problems. Geneviève is combating as best she can with what little force she still has. Between them, they call their disease Neuro-B.
In our borreliosis network, we are all Neuro-B, meaning that we are not able to hold a long-term job and carry on an effort in the long term because we must fight. This is why we have said we will go forward in a soft way. We will struggle softly to win a fight that we can't win in a forceful way. We can't slam our fist on the table. Sometimes we can't even move.
So it's on her computer that she's trying to move things forward. One priority is making sure residents living in the mountains around her home are finally informed of the danger from ticks.
There is no information signaling even a minimum alert. Nothing posted in pharmacies, nothing on trails, in the forest, in holiday campgrounds. Nothing is posted on panels, for example, to alert people about tick infestations. This is because it upsets the hotels, the restaurants, all those involved in mountain tourism. It's very hard for a mayor to convince the town council that a panel must be put up to inform tourists of the danger of ticks. A panel that says, "Beware, there are ticks in the area." Local officials are afraid that the baker won't come to open up a shop here because there are no tourists. It's really a big problem, because if nothing can be said about the ticks, where are we heading?
It's the official silence that makes her angry.
Why is there no information in all of the pharmacies? Why has the government not put an information campaign into place with big panels, with loudspeakers, in doctors' offices, and in all the regions? Why is there no information campaign for doctors? Because we know that the ticks are everywhere. They're all around.
It's true that, contrary to many other countries, in France's forests, practically no information is available about ticks. The map for hikers, forbidden behavior, and fire risks are written in black and white, but there's no mention of ticks and Lyme disease. One of France's only warning panels is here. It's in the forest of Sénart, near Paris. It's Joanna who had it installed, with the help from her local town council.
If I'd had that information before I became ill, I would not be ill like this today. I had no idea that the disease existed. Back when I was bitten by the tick, I had never heard of Lyme disease. And the information would have helped to shorten the time needed by doctors to diagnose my illness. I would have begun my treatment earlier. I would have been in better health because of that. So this information is definitely needed, and it's still lacking.
3 million visitors a year walk in this forest. Among the surrounding villages, only Hyères considered it important enough to inform visitors of the danger of contamination from ticks. Yet the precautions to take are very simple.
The day I was bitten, it was May 1st, and it was cold. I wore jeans and tall boots. Yet the tick climbed up my leg to my waist. If I had had the information, I would have tucked my pants into my socks, and I'd have been almost completely protected from the tick bite.
Pull up socks. Avoid going into tall grass. Wear clothing that covers your skin. Use repellents. Search for ticks on your skin after your hike. If you have a tick, remove it with tweezers or a tick twister, but never with your fingers. These are such simple methods when you consider the tragedy of chronic Lyme disease. The methods are essential, as long as the disease and its mechanisms remain a mystery. Is Lyme disease really a rare disease? Why are officials imposing a test for the disease which is considered non-effective? Why not authorize long-term treatments if, as some claim, the disease can become chronic? And finally, in the face of scientific uncertainty, why is research so underfinanced?
This story is right out of a modern medical thriller. Who profits from Lyme being so neglected? Who profits from patients not being treated? Some suggest that it's the pharmaceutical industry. If people remain ill, they can profit from selling long-term treatments. But that sounds simplistic to me. I don't know if that's the reason, or if what we're seeing is just a form of general immobilism. Why the lack of progress? Is it because of a conflict of interests, of egos, or of power struggles? I don't know, but the situation in France is so much more complicated than elsewhere.
But I think what we need to do is we need to create chronic disease centers. And you train the doctors, just like you've trained them in cardiology, in neurology, you train them in chronic disease medicine.
Research into Lyme disease is still at its early stages, but the threat of Lyme disease is growing. For health authorities and scientists, this is a veritable race for a solution. It's a race that can be won, but only if the urgent need for a solution is finally recognized.